Well, good evening, everyone. A very, very warm welcome to this platform, Remembering a Jesuit Pope. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Father Grant Tange, the director of the Jesuit Institute, and I am very grateful to welcome Fr Russell Pollitt, who is the former director of the Jesuit Institute and current parish priest of Holy Trinity Catholic Church in Braamfontein. Thank you, Father Russell, for being with us tonight. I know that it's been a busy week for you. It's been a busy week for us all as we come to grips with the death of Pope Francis. And we thought that we'd give this time, we'd create this platform for Father Russell to share a few of his reflections on Pope Francis, a Jesuit Pope, but also that can enable us to have a platform to share our own feelings about Pope Francis, to have some questions perhaps that we have, and to share, to express something of what we are feeling at this moment. I think the structure of tonight is going to be very, very simple. We're going to be just starting with a moment of silence, remembering Pope Francis together, and then we can have a brief prayer for him. And then I'm going to invite Russell to give his reflections for about 15 minutes on Pope Francis himself. And then I'm going to invite people in the chat to mention a word or a phrase of what Pope Francis meant to you, what you feel about Pope Francis. And then I'm going to invite again in the chat section any questions or comments or reflections about Pope Francis from yourselves. I would ask you please to keep the questions and the comments about Pope Francis, but not to enter into the realm of what's going to happen next. I'm going to be giving Fr Russell Pollitt time at the end to reflect on the next steps going forward, and that will help us to understand the procedure and the process of where we go to from here. But I want to try and keep the space to be a reflective session about Pope Francis and what he has meant to us. So from that perspective, let us just take a minute of silence as we remember our brother Jesuit and our Pope, Pope Francis. Remember him in our prayers and in our hearts. Let us pray to Almighty God. O Lord Jesus Christ, Supreme Pastor of the Church, we thank you for the ministry of Pope Francis and the selfless care with which he has led us as successor of Peter and your vicar on earth. Good Shepherd, who founded your church on the rock of Peter's faith and have never left your flock untended, look with love upon us now and sustain your church in faith, hope, and charity. Grant, Lord Jesus, in your boundless love for us, a new Pope for your church, who will please you by his holiness and lead us faithfully to you, who are the same yesterday, today, and forever. Let us join in this prayer as we pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Amen.
Give us
Give us
this
this
day
day
our
our
daily
daily
bread,
bread,
and
and
forgive
forgive
us
us our
our
trespasses,
trespasses, as
as
we
we
forgive
forgive
those
those who trespass
who trespass
against us.
against us. And lead
And
us
lead
not
us not into
into
temptation.
temptation, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So thank you for that moment of silence. I'm going to invite Russell when you're ready to give your reflections about Pope Francis. Thank you.
So thank you, Grant, and good evening, everybody. Good to see so many of you, lots of familiar faces. Just want to alert Ursula, because I've just got 2 messages from people that are apparently trying to get in, but it says the meeting's at capacity. I'm not sure if you can do anything about that, but I'll leave that to you. So what a tumultuous week it's been. I've been thinking about that this afternoon. Easter Triduum, Easter, and then the death of Pope Francis. And what I thought tonight is I would just give a couple of broad sketches of my reflections on him. And then, as Grant said, we can take it forward there, your own reflections and some questions. I think we need to begin with his family life. You know, Francis said this many times, but the things that shaped him, it seems to me, are quite important. And the first one is that he came from a migrant family. So migration has sort of been part and parcel of his DNA from when he was a young person. He was the son of Italian migrants. And one often wonders today, you know, how does moving like that, migrating like that, shape you as a young person? What impact does it have on you? Quite clearly, in the life of Francis, we see this very specifically, that it shaped his ministry. Really, in the papacy, one of the major themes is migration, which we'll get to just in a few minutes. I think another thing is to say that his early life and the way he described discerning his vocation, you know, that he went to study science, and he even worked for a while as a bouncer in a club and so forth. We need to remember these are the things that made the man. And then he went into Jesuit formation. And I think that very often when we talk about Francis as Pope, this is part of the puzzle that is really left out, that his formation as a Jesuit played a big role in the way that he chose to be the Bishop of Rome. We go through 2 years of novitiate, where we do the spiritual exercises. We do a number of what we call experiments in the novitiate, and those experiments are all meant to be with the poor. So we work in hospitals, or we work in old age homes. Sometimes people are sent on pilgrimage. Sometimes people are sent to work with street children. And I think these are formative experiences. You know, even if I think back of, I did my novitiate in the height of the HIV pandemic, and I was sent to work in a hospice where people were dying every day. These things shape you. So that early life of his, I think in the novitiate, is one that we need to think about as well. And this played out, I think, throughout his life. We know that he studied philosophy, he studied theology, and then he himself became a formator later on, and eventually provincial. And even the young men that were under his guidance when he was a formator, he sent to go and work with the poor. And he would say, it's not just about studying theology, but it's about getting your feet dirty in the lives of people. So the theme of the poor might come from his own experience of being poor migrant, but also very much part and parcel of the way that he was formed as a Jesuit. I think as well, his style of governance in the church may have been one that surprised many people. And again, one has to look at his Jesuit background to understand the way that he tried to govern the church. And even perhaps in the last months of his life, the question of synodality, which was very much still being spoken about. A Jesuit provincial, which he was, has consultors, and he makes decisions with those consultors. You'll remember right at the beginning of the papacy, he set up the C7, which eventually became C9, where he had cardinals from every continent in the world that were part of a council that he regularly met with to try and to share the governance of the church, listening to these peripheries. When he was in Buenos Aires, he said himself a few times when he was Archbishop that he felt that they were on the periphery there and very far from the center. You'll remember the night of the 13th of March, 2013, when he was elected Pope, one of the first things he said was that the Cardinals went to the ends of the earth to find a Bishop of Rome. And this has got something to do with his sense that this was very far from the center. And so when he had to govern the universal church, it seems to me he was aware of that. And so tried to bring people in from all over so that there was a sense that people were participating through those that represented these various places in the world in the governance of the church. Another big theme in Jesuit spirituality is that of talking about this right from the beginning, this question of discernment. And I'm not always sure. I experienced 2 synods in Rome. I worked for Vatican Media, and the word discernment was used. And I wasn't always sure that everybody who was present there in those synod of bishops understood what discernment is. I often got the impression that the bishops thought we come to Rome, we have a discussion, we agree on something, and that's what we implement. And there was a kind of struggle to understand Francis when he used to speak about discernment, because he said things like, well, discernment's messy. Discernment causes chaos. And the bishop was saying, well, why must this is not discernment. So discernment was a big theme, I think, of his papacy. And I'm not always sure that the whole church understood what discernment was or is or was for Francis, but coming very much, I think, out of that Jesuit mindset that he had. I think Francis suffered as the provincial of the Jesuits when he was provincial in Argentina. There's lots of stories around that. You can look it up yourself. But I think some of the suffering that he experienced while he was provincial also laid the foundation for him to try and be a different kind of pope. And sometimes I wondered to myself when he said, I'm a sinner, if this also wasn't part of recognizing that as provincial, he did make some mistakes in the governance of that province. I think another big thing that I would say was very important, and we see this, is Francis had pastoral experience. He was not so familiar with the Roman Curia. He used to go to Rome, and Jerry O'Connell, who is the America correspondent in Rome, they live just on the other side of the Tiber. I've been to Jerry a couple of times. They have wonderful pictures of Bergoglio as cardinal eating dinners with them. Bergoglio would go to Rome for various meetings. He would pop in to see his wife because she was a major correspondent on religion for La Nación, which is the Argentinian Catholic newspaper. And Bergoglio would go there and he would disappear. He didn't like to hang around. He didn't know too much. He went to the Curia for business. But he had a lot of pastoral experience, many years as auxiliary bishop. You will remember those wonderful photos of him on public transport, going into the slums and being with people in the mess of their lives. And I think his deep sense of God's mercy and his episcopal motto of mercy came from his real experience in the messiness of people's lives. You'll remember, I'm not saying that other popes did not understand messiness, but I do think that his pastoral experience in the global south, in slums with poor people, left an impression on him that maybe people like Pope Benedict did not experience, who for a large part of his life was either a university professor or he was in curial offices in Rome. So I think his pastoral experience shaped Francis very much, and I don't think that that's always given attention. Another thing I think is very important for us to mention is the question of liberation theology. You know, he came from the continent where liberation theology was born. And under Pope John Paul II, you had to be very careful saying the word liberation theology. They really clamped down on liberation theologians. But you'll remember the famous Aparecida document, which he was instrumental in, the final document of the Fifth General Conference of the Episcopate of Latin America and the Caribbean. And that was in 2007. And you see echoes of that document in that first papal document that was put out, The Joy of the Gospel. The Aparecida document was called Disciples and Missionaries of Jesus Christ, so that our peoples may have life in him. And it was a very clear and compelling document. It related the gospel and the teachings of Christ to the economic and social problems of the people in Latin America, stressing that work for social justice is absolutely at the heart of the Christian faith. That was very, very strong in that Aparecida document. And so there was a vision there of the Catholic faith that was open to the goodness of other Christians, to other faith traditions, and indeed of all people committed to the task of securing human well-being for everyone on the planet. And I think that document really, because he was part of the discussions of it and instrumental in writing that document was really for him a roadmap for the papacy. He was inspired by St. Francis of Assisi. I remember the night he was elected, I was sitting with media. They were asking me questions about the conclave, and they say when they announced Pope Francis, I thought, oh, yeah, it must be Francis Xavier. Well, Jesuit arrogance, because soon it was clarified that it was Francis of Assisi. And Francis too consistently showed deep compassion for the poor, for sick, for prisoners, etc., etc., etc. And of course, the question of creation and ecology. But a lot of people talk about Pope Francis talking about ecology as if somehow he was just concerned with the degradation of the planet. He linked this very, very clearly in Laudato Si and subsequent documents to also the plight of the poor. That these things were very interlinked and you can't separate them out. And so you see the echoes there again of Francis of Assisi, who clearly had a very, very big influence on Pope Francis himself. Right at the beginning of the papacy, he was given by the Cardinals the mandate of reforming the church. Reforming the church. And I remember one cardinal saying to me, we did mandate him to reform the church, but sure, we did not know that he was going to go as far as what he went. And in that mandate, they said to him, you need to look at the central administration of the church. You need to promote professional competence and inclusivity and also transparency. And I think what Francis was trying to do, and I think the jury's out of whether he succeeded or not, was try to humanize almost the Vatican machinery. You know, if you go to Rome and you have to deal with the curia and those officers, you really do feel like you just treated, you passed on from one kind of department or one office to another. There was a real sense of a lack of humanness there. And I think that that was one of the things that he tried to do. He took over a church that maybe not too dissimilar to today. I think that is struggling. He had to deal with huge financial problems in the church, the painful legacy of sex abuse. These were all kind of the complexity that he had to face, not just the reform of the curia and the administration, but the problems of financial mismanagement, and also, of course, the real issue of sex abuse. And I think this was a very difficult thing to inherit. And yet, it seems to me that he tried the best he could to deal with some of those things. He appointed people into the financial situation of the church that seemed to be able to bring some sort of order and some transparency there. In terms of the abuse thing in the church, he went further than what Benedict had gone. I don't think at the beginning Francis was as kind of sharp as he should have been around the abuse issue. I think that only when the whole bishops' conference in Chile resigned over abuse, that it suddenly he realized that this is very serious and he needs to deal with it. Of course, victims still think the church did not go far enough. Francis met many times with victims. He dismissed some senior clerics, but also there were other people that he allowed to continue in ministry, like, let me just put it out there, like the ex-Jesuit Rupnik, who is still a priest, and we are not quite sure why that is. And so I think he partly did advance the question of the protection of minors and try to deal with the sex abuse thing, but he probably also has not done enough in terms of not very good structures have been put in place, but I'm not sure that we have dealt justly still with the victims of abuse. Maybe just a couple of other things before I end off that we can just think about. Remember, in the dark days of the global COVID-19 pandemic, Francis walking across that empty square, that very powerful gesture. I think Francis understood stuff around the composition of place and symbol. This was important for him. I'd like to think that a lot of this as well is rooted in the spiritual exercises, because Ignatius does say in the spiritual exercises that we need to, that what we look at and the way we do things symbolically is very important. Ignatius chose places in Rome for their symbolic significance. And I think the power of a pope walking across an empty square and that prayer service that he led for almost the whole world was a very, very powerful gesture. And many people felt that the Pope was close to them as they struggled with the pandemic and with death. I think as well that his greater inclusion of women in the church, he appointed women to significant roles and initiated discussions around women in the church. Although some of that seems to have stalled in the last year or so, many women feel that he started to open a door to talk seriously about them who feel excluded from the church. Others will say he did not go far enough. He will be maybe remembered as the Pope who appointed women to positions and opened the door, but it didn't go any much further than that, and we wait to see what happens now with some of the commissions that he appointed. In the religious world, I think the Pope was really important. He reached out to the Muslim world more than any Pope has ever done in history. He went to Egypt, he went to Saudi Arabia, he went to Morocco. I was fortunate enough to accompany him to Morocco, and the Pope was totally at ease with these religious leaders from the Muslim world. But not just the Muslim world, I think even in the Christian world, I've heard so many people from other churches saying that they felt that Pope Francis was a leader of the church in the broadest sense of the word. I remember a Muslim person in Cape Town one day saying in a discussion, "Our Father Francis." And then we realized he was talking about the Pope, that there was a sense that people owned this Pope as a leader. And then I think maybe the last two things to say, my reflection on this Pope is Francis was a very important moral voice in a world where we have lost leadership that is able to give moral direction. There's going to be a real vacuum, in my opinion, at the moment, in the current context we find ourselves when it comes to moral leadership. Francis was not afraid to speak to the rich and the powerful in the world. He had a very difficult and uncomfortable relationship, for example, not just with the United States of America, but with many of the bishops in the United States of America because of Francis's very critical view of the way that things are done by the rich and powerful in the world. He consistently called for the welcome and the care of migrants and refugees when many politicians across the world were using xenophobia in a way of politicking to make sure that they were scoring political points and making migrants and refugees the scapegoat for many problems that some of these politicians themselves created. And Francis was never going to take that. Just recently, before he died, he wrote a letter to the United States bishops, again expressing his concern about the way that the new administration in the US is going. But it wasn't just for migrants and refugees. He was outspoken on prisoners. He was outspoken on the death penalty. And I think he showed a real compassion and empathy for these kinds of peoples on the margins that made people who were rich and powerful feel very, very uncomfortable. He wasn't worried about national identity or religious identity. He was worried about human beings and human rights. And I think that is what made him a global leader. He was not afraid to challenge the regime in Israel at the moment. He called for peace in war-torn countries. He visited war zones like the Central African Republic, where they told him not to go. He chose to go there. He advocated for justice at the United Nations. And many people remember those powerful images of him kneeling down and kissing the feet of those Sudanese leaders when they were trying to get them to sign a peace accord in Rome in 2019. He was really a global moral figure. I think he became more and more frustrated with the situation in Israel, and he told them many times to please seek the path of peace by dialogue and not by guns. And some of his most explicit criticism of Israel came last November when he even suggested that the global community study whether Israel's military campaign in Gaza constitutes a genocide of the Palestinian people. He used very strong language. You might remember as well, in December 2024, he unveiled a nativity scene in Rome in which baby Jesus was wrapped in a keffiyeh. To end off, I think there are some critiques of Francis. I think we should not make him a saint, and I don't think he wanted us to make him a saint. I think that Francis was impatient and didn't get people on board. He didn't always try to bring people with him. And I think we see this in a number of different spaces. Maybe one just to highlight is Fiducius Supplicans. That document, the church was not really well prepared for that. He let that document out. And as we know, especially on the continent of Africa, that caused huge difficulties. That caused huge problems, that even one of the cardinals from Africa went to Rome and told him to withdraw that document. And he kind of backed down a little bit. But I think there were times where Francis did not always bring people along with him. I don't think Francis always chose the greatest people to be his closest aides. Sometimes I wonder whether his choice of personal aides was kind of the inability of him to discern well personalities. And it seems that some of the people he chose set him at odds before they even started the job. I don't think always he thought that through very clearly. Maybe he was also getting advice that was not great. I think as well, he at times he left a lot of unfinished business. I think the sex abuse issue in the church is unfinished business in many ways. And maybe this is something that's always going to be unfinished business. The question of women, for example, I think is unfinished business. I think he was limited there by his own theology and his own upbringing. I would also say, and I'm no advocate, for example, for the extraordinary form of the Mass, but we know that Pope Benedict allowed that to happen in his papacy, and it seemed to me that Francis's clamping down on that led to a lot of pain and a lot of struggle for many people in the church, not so much in our part of the world, but especially in Europe and in North America, which I wonder if it was the best way to do that. That he clamped down on that, and there was a rumor going around just at the beginning of this month that he intended to write a letter to kind of almost reverse that decision that he made. Now, I don't want to make a judgment on the Mass itself, but I just wonder, in terms of dealing with people, if he dealt with that in the right way, if he dealt with that in the best way. I also think that Francis failed when it came to the question of the formation of clergy. Many, many times he would decry the question of clericalism. He said some very harsh things to the Roman Curia about clericalism. And yet it seems to me that the obvious thing would have been is to talk about perhaps the way that clergy are formed, that we train clergy, because we're still using a system which is a monastic system to train clergy for a very complex world. Where people are sent off and they live in a seminary, all just men. Everybody, I'm sure, knows the story there. And I wonder why he never called for a reform it's no use dealing with the symptoms. You have to go and deal, I think, with the deeper problem. And my suspicion is that the problem is a lot of the theology that's taught and the way that it is taught in our seminaries. And so I would say that would be a big critique of Francis. Let me leave it at that. I've said a number of things. It was more than 15 minutes, but to cover just a short part of his life and highlight a few things is almost impossible in 15 minutes.
Russell, thank you so much for your reflections. They're very rich, and as you said, they're very varied. You've given us so many wonderful reflections on his background, his Jesuit formation, the fact he comes from a science background, his migrant background as well, influencing his ministry, style of governance. Of course, Jesuits has often spoken about how they can understand what Pope Francis is doing because of their Jesuit formation. And we know about Jesuit provincials and consultors and his council, his group of council that he gathered around him. The fact that coming from Argentina, far from the center of the world, at least the Roman world, bringing people in from the outside, his language of discernment, I think that's also very notable, certainly from a Jesuit point of view, the way he used that language. And I think you've noted that well, that sometimes bishops, when you were experiencing those platforms, didn't seem to understand this process of discernment that Pope Francis often referenced. His pastoral experience, of course, being a very important part of his approach as a pope, and his experience of the poor, being with the poor, reaching out to the poor, and having Francis of Assisi as a key focus point for his papacy is very central. Of course, liberation theology, and I love the way you pointed out echoes of that document that he was involved with just before his papacy, coming out in his document of the joy of the gospel. His attempts at reform and his reaching out to different aspects of the world, Muslim world, for example. I think I was very touched with just looking at the number of comments in different news sites from the range of different people that have remarked about his passing, and you cannot identify a kind of a particular group of people that are kind of certainly mourning him. It seems to me people from all different contexts and all different backgrounds are mourning him as well. being very outspoken of numerous important things, the death penalty, human beings, human rights, and of course, peace, very outspoken on peace and war, trying to end war in all sorts of war-torn places, using that strong language. And of course, we can have a critique of things that he was working on that didn't come to completion. I think you pointed those well out. Some unfinished business, perhaps, at the end of his papacy, but that's a lot for us to think about. It's a lot for us to reflect on, but it's a very, very rich reflection. I thank you very much for that. I think we have a large group online. This is probably the largest group I've ever had online. And what we were hoping to do now is in the chat section, to have a chance for you to express, perhaps in a word or phrase, something that you were thinking in terms of Pope Francis. What did Pope Francis mean to you, in a word or a phrase? But considering the time period, I think if we want to also give Father Russell a chance to answer some questions, let's see if we can get through all of our chat sections, but maybe if we could just include questions that you may have, if you would like, in that chat section now. So let's give you an opportunity to add a word or a phrase, something that Pope Francis meant to you, and maybe a question for Russell to answer. So there's already some thank yous coming in for you, Russell. So Teresa mentions humility is her word about Pope Francis, a humble person, champion of inclusion. He was the Pope who made me feel proud to be a Catholic. Yvonne is thanking you, Russell, for your analysis. There's a question here. Or maybe we can come back to the questions. Let's continue with our word and phrase. Hope in a return to my Vatican II roots, non-judgmental. He embodied God's love and mercy, a man born for this time. So Sarah mentioned she had an opportunity to translate a Brazilian book that looked at Pope Francis's Marian spirituality and practical application. It really helped her to connect with him as a person. Courageous. Pope Francis was courageous. Good preacher. Embodiment of core values of our faith. The image of church as a hospital, coming out of Pope Francis's papacy. Humility, compassion, emptying of self in prayer. Laudato Si and hope. Advocate of the poor and marginalized. Sense of humor. He had a good sense of humor. Humility, a true servant. He ruled from the heart and not from the throne. Servant leadership made the church relevant to the youth and young daughters. Pope Francis has been a transformative figure embodying humility, compassion, and a commitment to social justice. His leadership reflects a deep desire to bring people closer to God through mercy and inclusion. For the Catholic community, he has emphasized the importance of love, service, and caring for the marginalized, inspiring a renewed sense of mission. On a global scale, his advocacy for environmental protection, peace, and dialogue among different faiths has made a lasting impact, reminding the world of the power of faith in action. Commitment to those who are marginalized and feel excluded for being different. Joyful shepherd. Again, humility and merciful. Peacemaker. I've appreciated his holy untidiness that was and has been needed for a long time. A field hospital and not just a university medical school. Thank you, Graham. Gently brave and courageous. A true servant, a real true servant and a beautiful soul. Thank you, Elaine. Caring, kind, and courageous. A joyful and free spirit. Extraordinary. Felt safe for Francis at the helm of the Universal Church. A pope for all. Reliable and human. Fearless in a world that is so materialistic. He really cared about people and wanted to be among the people. Thelma says, I think he came at the right time for our church. He helped us to really look at our church. Synodality helped us to bring our church into the 21st century. A street pope. So, Russell, what are the chances of the Vatican allowing our continent to have an African pope?
Yeah, everybody's asking these questions about who's next. Will there be an African pope? Look, I think my personal opinion at the moment is, if I just reasons, and I don't want to get into all the technicalities. First of all, I don't think the Cardinals know each other well. And I think that's why it's difficult to tell. There's some that are in the press regularly. The big names, Turkson, or from this continent, or Sarah, or Paralin. But there are many cardinals that are on the peripheries and in peripheral places, and Francis did that. Like, for example, everybody knows who the Archbishop of Los Angeles is. Everybody knows who the Archbishop of New York is. And they were always cardinals in the past. Well, Francis never made the Archbishop of Gomez of Los Angeles a cardinal. He chose people from the peripheries. And so, first of all, I think it's a wild card thing, because we don't know all the cardinals. We only know the ones that the media chooses to put in front of us. Instead of thinking about a pope, and we do this, will a pope come from Africa or Asia, or where? I think at this time, in the global context we find ourselves, we need a pope who can lead the church and be a moral voice. And I think that's much more important than where the pope comes from. That said, I think a pope from the global south will probably understand the issues of the global south better than people who come from the north. And I also think we need to remember that the church is growing much more in the global south. And so it would be more representative of the church to have a pope from the global south. Might be an African, might be an Asian. We just don't know. I think it's very hard to tell at this stage. And I think we've got to trust that God's Spirit will work as it did in 2013.
Thanks, Ross. That's a difficult question to encounter. Maybe this next one is a little easier. Terence said, in time to come, for what do you think Pope Francis will be most remembered?
I saw that question. I think probably he's going to be remembered as a pastoral pope, Benedict XVI was a theologian. He was probably the best theologian the church has had in the last 100 years. He was an excellent theologian. I think Francis is going to be remembered for being a shepherd. And right underneath that shepherd is especially for the poor, the marginalized, migrants, those groups of people that we've spoken about. So I think Francis will be the great shepherd, and the also not just shepherd in terms of the poor and the marginal, but shepherd in terms of also the earth. He widened our vision to say we need to take care not just of people, but also of the earth, because the two are so interrelated. So I would think that would be two big things that he will be remembered for. And maybe if you to throw another thing in there is a question of inclusion. You know, we live in a world that is full of exclusion. We are seeking all the time to exclude people, us and them. And I think Francis really wanted to include everybody. And that's why he wasn't afraid to meet, you know, with Muslim leaders, to meet with other Christian leaders, to meet with Sikhs, to whoever. That question of inclusion, I think, was really important for him. I think he'll be remembered for that.
Now, that is a remarkable aspect of his papacy, and a very, very good pastor, very good pastor of people and in the church. There's a question from Tony Roland. She asks about the sex abuse crisis and how that may have distracted him from the message on family and marriage that he began in Amoris Laetitia to talk about and to think about. Do you think that these things are at odds to one another in his papacy?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think Fiducia Supplicans was also part of his ministry to families. Because you see, the problem with Fiducia Supplicans is everybody focused on just one thing, and that was the question of the blessing of gay people. If you read that document really carefully, he was talking about people in irregular situations that pertains to marriage, family life, etc., etc., etc. So I don't think he gave up or he forgot about it or the sex abuse thing distracted him. Out his papacy, he was referring to the question of family. I don't think he ever forgot about it.
There's another one here, Russell. Are there any cardinals who you think will be one of the options to carry on this track that Francis has us on in the church? Maybe this is another question you're getting quite a lot.
There's 135 cardinals, I think, that will be going into the conclave. There's 200 and something, but there's only 135 electors, of which 90 of those, I think, have been more or less 90 were appointed by Francis. So I think that there's quite a few people that will be able to carry on what he has done. I don't think that I think there will be continuity, and I think there are people who could certainly pick up from and carry on what he has done. I don't think that's an issue.
Now, Sarah Lee has perhaps a follow-on question to that. Although Francis was transformative in many ways, did his impact really touch at the heart of the church, so that the church is willing to continue the transformation going forward? That's an interesting question. Do you think that we can carry this momentum forward?
It depends how you define church. That's the first thing I would say. It depends how you define church. I think, yes, I mean, I think that the momentum, I think if people continue on the synodal path, which I think has opened so many doors for people, I think that the momentum can carry on. And I think there's a certain vitality. If one looks, for example, at the amount of young people that were received into the church in Britain this last Easter, if you look at, the growing population on this continent, I think there is a vitality there. And I think that this will continue. See, I don't think anything that Francis has done in terms of the broader church, the wider church, I don't think any of that can be in any way driven back on. So maybe people want to do other things, but I would like to think that there is a vitality, and he's taught us a new way of being church, and I think we're learning that new way. And I think you can't suddenly erase that the question of dialogue, the question of synodality. And so I would have great hope that this would continue. It may not continue, in the way that we'd like in the leadership of the church, but I think we have to ask ourselves, it's a perennial question for Catholics, right? Who is the church? We are the church. We are the church. If we choose to carry this on, it carries on. If we choose to do it in our parishes, in our communities, etc., it carries on. So I think, yes, I think Francis has opened the door for something new.
I think that really responds well to Pope Francis's invitation to us all to get involved in evangelization, to get involved in the mission of the church, to take up our roles and our tasks. That was very clear in the joy of the gospel. So I hope that we can carry that momentum forward. Colleen has a question. Are the women who Pope Francis appointed to leadership positions in the church respected and supported by others who serve on the commissions, or do they meet resistance in their leadership?
My reading of that would be that it's a mixed bag, that there would be resistance from some people, but in other places would be. One looks at Sister Natalie Baclou, who was part of leading the synod process. My impression is that she was very well respected by a lot of people, and that she was invited into many spaces to talk, and people took her very seriously. So I think there will be pockets of resistance. There was resistance to Pope Francis himself. Let's face facts. I mean, it wasn't without resistance from within the church as well. There were people, and I can name some senior people and others who were resistant. I think this is part of human life. So I would say mixed bag.
Yeah, we had the opportunity to speak with Natalie Becar as a Jesuit formation team on Zoom, and was a formidable woman in the synod, and I think she had met a little bit of resistance, but she's a very strong woman and very, very impressive. Was the Pope as liberal as some say he was? Alan asks. Was he not also a conservator of ancient Catholic ways? And then he mentions a link with communion e liberazione. It's a tough question, Russell. How do you define his standpoint?
Question of tradition. I don't think he broke with tradition. I think he understood and lived tradition in a different way to maybe what it was done before. The only doctrinal thing, just off the top of my head, that I think Francis ever changed was to say that the death penalty can never be right in any situation. There was no other doctrine of the church that he changed. So was he liberal? I don't think so. I think, was he progressive? Maybe. I think Francis was more concerned about the church being relevant to people's lives and journeying with them than wanting to set out and change tradition. I think that's a very bad caricature. And I think people who were kind of angered by him or upset by him caricatured him as this person who wants to destroy tradition. Well, I don't think he wanted to destroy tradition at all. I don't think there's any evidence of that. I also think, just to finish that question of tradition, he didn't see tradition as something static. You see, people think about traditions like always the same old thing. Tradition develops. The church's tradition has developed over centuries. And I think he saw the tradition as something that is living and developing as well. That we weren't trying to get rid of things, but that we were trying to make things more kind of contextual for the time that we found ourselves in.
Thanks for that, Russell. It's a difficult question to answer, and maybe going forward we can keep thinking about it and keep reflecting about it. I think we've come to the end of our time together. Just before we close off our conversation, Russell, can you give us a sense of what happens now? What are the steps going forward, coming up to the conclave and going forward from there? What happens?
So we're going to have the Pope's funeral. So the Pope's funeral will be, it's been done now in 3 stages, right? So he was, first of all, we had the ceremonies in Santa Marta Chapel. Today, the second phase began with his body lying in state. And then we'll have the Mass on Saturday morning, which will be led by the Dean of the College of Cardinals. At the moment, people are asking who's running the church. So, in charge of the administration of the church is the Carmelingo, as they call him, of the Holy Roman Church, which is Cardinal Kevin Farrell. But in a way, it's the cardinals as a college at the moment that are running the church. So Farrell is looking after the administration, but it's the College of Cardinals together that are running the church. So then the dean of the college, after the funeral, will call meetings with the cardinals. They will come together. They will meet, they will talk, they will get to know each other. This is going to be a very key aspect of this conclave, is the cardinals getting to know each other. They don't know each other. And already I know there's a bit of tension between the cardinals because they already have had 2 meetings and not all the cardinals are in Rome yet. So the ones in Europe who could get there the quickest have got there. And even a cardinal said to me today, you know, I have a problem with the fact that they didn't wait for the rest of us. So they will need to get to know each other. And the cardinals will meet for a number of days, getting to know each other and talking about the issues that the church faces. Maybe they'll do a bit of a reflection on the papacy up to now. They will talk about what the church faces, the challenges of the church, I think the global context we find ourselves in. And then they will ask themselves the question, who might be the best among us to take up leadership given the profile that we have spoken about, the issues that we've spoken about together, and then they will go into conclave. In the last 4 or 5 conclaves, I think they've all been between 2 and 5 days. I see some commentators are saying this is going to be a much longer conclave because the cardinals don't know each other. We just don't know these things, you know. I think we will have to wait and see what happens. So they'll go into the conclave. There will be no communication with the outside world from those cardinals until they have decided who the Pope will be. Out of the 135 electors, at least 90, so two-thirds, a two-third majority have to have voted for a single person. And then we will see the white smoke and we will know who the new Pope is. If you haven't seen the movie, The Conclave, it is actually worth watching. I think it's well done, and I think it gives one a sense of what goes on in a conclave. You have to look past some of the Hollywood nonsense about, them going into the Pope's room and finding letters that are hidden in, bed frames and also that's all Hollywood stuff. But I just think in terms of what happens, I think there is a certain amount of politicking at a conclave as well. I mean, you see, this is human life. There is a certain amount of politicking, but maybe someone said to me today, it is politicking, but it's prayerful politicking, because there's also reflection, there's also prayer, and we ultimately believe that the Holy Spirit will give us the Pope that we need at this time. And we have to trust in God's Spirit. And that's what the Church has done for 266, is it, popes? We're going to have the 267th. And so we have to trust the process.
Russell, thank you so much for your input and your time with us tonight. I really do appreciate it. Thank you to Ursula and my team for being here and for facilitating this platform. And of course, thank you to each one of you for being with us tonight. It is a really, really busy time. It is a strange time celebrating Easter, but at the same time, entering into a mourning process for Pope Francis, but an anxiety about what's going to happen going forward. Let us keep all this process in our prayers. Let us ask for God's grace in each one of our lives, and of course, God's grace to be with the Church as we carry this process forward and welcome the new Pope, whoever he may be. So thank you to each one of you, and have a wonderful evening and a great Easter season. Thank you for being with us.